radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 28, recorded on Friday, March 12th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we're going to take a close look at the American Rescue Plan and show you all that elections do indeed have consequences. And this time, very good consequences. But first, the headlines.
The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
First up in headlines, those pesky social justice warriors are at it again.
I had to just put this in here because I couldn't stand the idea of I don't know what to make of this, Jason. I don't even know what to make of this whole thing. People are losing their goddamn minds.
It's the edgelords, those internet conservatives. They love objectifying and sexualizing cartoons.
For those of you who aren't aware, cancel culture struck again when the newest teaser images from the upcoming Space Jam sequel released pictures of Lola Bunny not super sexy.
I've heard most of the images that are being used to show this is what she used to look like. We're not actually from the first Space Jam movie. They're from some weird deviant art, like furry porn.
Oh, God.
So
that's even worse.
That's what they want. They want the furry porn. And instead they're getting just a female rabbit that plays basketball. And they can't handle it.
I can't even wrap my head around why people are upset that they took the sexiness out of a rabbit.
A cartoon lady rabbit. So since she's a lady, she's supposed to be an object of sexual desire.
It's freaking disgusting, man. In so many ways.
It's still the same fight from Gamergate.
I guess, yeah. Which we're not even I don't even want to go into that. We are pushing past that. I don't want to relive that time in history. We're going to move on.
So next to be canceled in the Looney Tunes cartoon world, Pepe Le Pew, who apparently his scene in Space Jam was cut, and he won't be appearing in the film or probably anything else that's coming out from Warner Brothers anytime soon.
And of course, people are losing their minds.
You gotta have the negative French stereotype rapist skunk in your movie, right?
If so, why are we going to take our kids to this in the first place? These are the traditional family values that Warner Brothers...
Now, I never really saw the first Space Jam. I am a little bit too old.
Are you serious?
To have... Yeah, I was probably
You need to watch the first Space Jam.
16 when that came out.
So
I wasn't really interested.
I watched it when I was 16 for the 80th time.
So I don't really have an attachment to that movie.
Oh my God.
But Pepe Le Pew, I definitely grew up with Looney Tunes. And let me tell you, Pepe Le Pew was the most boring snooze fest of a cartoon on Looney Tunes. It's always the same thing. The only interesting part out of any Pepe Le Pew episode is how the cat gets the white stripe. Because that's different every time, and that's the only thing. Once that happens, which is in the very beginning, then it's just boring.
Then it gets super rapey.
Yeah, just him chasing a cat and trying to rape it. And that's funny, I guess. I don't know. It was never one that I enjoyed. It's always, let's go to Bugs Bunny and the Tasmanian Devil and Daffy Duck.
Right. Well, and this is nothing new either. I think, what was it, back in the early 2000s, 2010s, I want to say? They were already starting to say, yeah, this character is problematic. We should probably stop, having this character around. So, this is nothing even new for anyone here. So, I don't know why people are making such a big deal about it now. This is old news.
And aren't these the same people that always profess that negative white male stereotypes are never taken seriously? Well, Pepe Le Pew is a negative white male stereotype, isn't he?
And they crave it. But you also see this too, and this is the exact same thing with the Dr. Seuss crap that we covered last week, where the whole idea of canceling, they always talk about how they canceled something. They took something that we loved away. You never hear these people actually talk about why these things are worthy of being in the spotlight. So I want to know why Pepe Le Pew should be in the spotlight. Why we shouldn't cancel, supposedly, Pepe Le Pew. I want to know why we shouldn't have a stereotypical female bunny playing basketball as opposed to a very sexy female bunny. Is this really the hill you're going to die on? Are you serious?
Needs to have big boobs so that I watch the cartoon.
Oh my God.
It's the same thing you saw with the She-Ra reboot, right? All the neckbeards online were all falling all over themselves because they took her big boobs away. She didn't have the boobs no more.
America's weird, man. We're so weird. No, I should probably rephrase. Men are weird. I don't see a lot of women caring about Lola's boobs or anything.
Moving on to our next weird, inappropriate man
Speaking
story.
of Pepe Le Pew.
The Andrew Cuomo accusation counter, and I've had to modify this twice since we started this document for the show this week, is now up to 7, including 4 former aides who have accused the governor of inappropriate conduct. I don't have a lot more to say about this, but I figured since we're keeping a running tally, we might as well keep it up. And to be fair, a lot of these aren't people that have actually accused him of sexually harassing them, but more just people saying, like, yes, he is guilty of inappropriate conduct.
They're corroborating, basically.
Yeah. So there's not, like, he's not going to go to jail over, a lot of these accusations. But
No, but more and more Democrats are calling for him to resign. Actually, a new state impeachment investigation just recently opened up in New York over this now, which is really good. And of course, he refuses to resign still.
The quote I saw is he's not going to give in to cancel culture. So
Shut up. I
that's-
didn't even
that's
hear
what I
that. Are you
heard.
serious?
So I look forward to Andrew Cuomo 2024 running for president as a Republican, apparently.
Get out of here, man. This is so dumb.
And as promised, we are drinking the Minocqua Brewing Company Bernie Brew. I will say it is not my favorite beer. It
What-
needs to be carbonated
You need
a little
what
bit
is it?
more.
You need to tell you need to tell everyone what it is first.
It's a milk stout brewed with maple syrup, and it's very flat. I would say that's like I get sweet and I get flat.
Which describes Bernie.
Always failing to deliver.
But promises so much.
And if it is like Bernie, I expect it to be wildly popular. But this is not beer talk, so we'll move on. I'll do that podcast some other time.
So, Jason, I haven't had a chance to look at this one. Tell me about Idaho.
Well, Idaho will finally be known for more than potatoes.
Okay.
Now they will also be known for holding mask burning protests during a global pandemic.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Really?
So at least 100 people gathered in front of the Idaho State Capitol on Saturday to burn masks in a protest against measures to limit infections and deaths caused by the coronavirus pandemic. There are some videos circulating online of children throwing masks into burning barrels. One of the quotes that came up is, "Here, fire, you hungry? Here's another mask," by one of the bowl haircutted children
Of Idaho.
of Idaho.
Oh, look at a Trump sweatshirt. There it is.
Yeah, get some more use out of that as much as you can over the next couple months. So yeah, very anti-science, anti-safety, anti-common sense protests.
God, they're so stupid. They're so dumb.
And I'm guessing these are also the same people that are not going to get vaccinated because that's just a government conspiracy. And that's really what we're fighting against. People that don't want to take the minimum precautions to try to keep themselves and everyone around them safe.
But it's not even that. It's that I will not take the minimum precautions, and I'm going to go out of my way just to spite you.
Because it's the Democratic Party trying to gain power over them by making them wear a mask. Because that's their real agenda.
I still have yet to hear why, kind of like that step 2 in the underpants gnomes thing, wear masks and like absolute power over people. Where's that step 2 come into play? Like, so they got you to wear a mask for a pandemic. What did that make them do now?
It's all about control.
If they can get you to wear a mask, they can make you do anything, man.
Except pass a $15 minimum wage or gun control.
Or actually pay attention and, read over a 3rd grade reading level. We're proud Idahoans.
Idaho bags. I think is the...
And in updates to the Derek Chauvin trial related to George Floyd's death, A judge recently reinstated the third-degree murder charge against him, which is a very good thing. And Jason, you may have heard some controversy about this where, so initially they were going to charge him harshly with the third-degree murder because of what happened. They naturally tried to drop that because Derek Chauvin appealed it, saying that there was some weird inconsistency of the law in Minnesota, saying that for third-degree murder in Minnesota, it's supposed to be directed towards multiple people and things like that. It's a crazy misinterpretation of the law. But a judge recently said, screw that, and we're going to put it back on anyway. And now he faces a third-degree murder charge, which is great.
Yeah, this did kind of delay the jury selection a little bit, but hopefully they'll somehow manage to find 12 people that have already not formed an opinion about this trial. And hopefully we get some justice finally in a cop murdering a civilian story, which rarely happens. We rarely even get to this point.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
It usually doesn't even get taken up by a grand jury.
So we'll keep tabs on this, and hopefully good news will come.
And our next story, Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson has signed a new anti-abortion bill into law, essentially banning all abortions except for when a pregnant person's life is in danger. And this, of course, is unconstitutional, which is what they want, because they want this to be taken up by the Supreme Court so that they can overturn Roe v. Wade.
Even better, this bill also does not include any exemptions for rape and incest.
And I believe the governor has a quote specifically about that. He said, "I would have preferred the legislation to include the exceptions for rape or incest, which has been my consistent view, and such exceptions would increase the chances for review by the U.S. Supreme Court."
But the Arkansas State GOP said, screw that, we're going to go all out batshit crazy.
And hurt their chances of it being that landmark case that every conservative has been looking for.
So almost more than likely, this is definitely going to go to at least the state courts. We'll see what happens on the appellate process, but I mean, this has absolutely no chance going anywhere. It could potentially get to the Supreme Court, but with these lack of exemptions, I don't think so.
Yeah, I hope not with the crazy justices we have in the Supreme Court.
Well, and that's the big problem here. You can see like Amy Coney Barrett and Clarence Thomas and them just probably like itching at the chance to do this type of crap. So who knows what they're going to want to take up.
Amy Coney Barrett basically built her entire career on the idea of making abortion illegal.
Yep. And we'll end with some good news for headlines. Biden gave a speech relating to the current status of COVID in this country after the signing of the American Rescue Plan Act, which we'll talk about just in a little bit in the main segment. And Jason, did you have a chance to watch this?
I did. So this was the 1-year anniversary after the shutdowns began, I guess, last March.
Were you just like as happy as I was just to have coherent sentences?
He was a little underwhelming last night in the speech. I watched the one from this morning as well, which kind of rehashed a lot of the same points. I felt he was a little bit more upbeat in the Rose Garden speech from today. But from the one from last night, I mean, the highlights were he asked for every state to have all adults eligible to receive the vaccine no later than May 1st.
Yep.
Which is important. Now, it doesn't mean everyone would receive a vaccine by May 1st, but just
that they're eligible.
Everyone would have the opportunity to at least sign up and be on a waiting list at that point. I believe the plan is to have enough vaccines for everyone by the end of May.
Yep, that's what he said.
And he also said that Johnson & Johnson is working with Merck to produce doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
And what is Merck?
That is another pharmaceutical company, so they're competitors technically, but they are working together to develop the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, which, remember, when that vaccine was first announced, they were not going to meet the production goals that they had initially. So hopefully working with Merck will allow them to produce more of their single-dose vaccine, which is important for a lot of people.
Biden also talked about surpassing his goal of 100 million COVID vaccine doses administered within his first 100 days. He actually did within 60, which is fantastic. Now, however, keep it within context. I think we talked about this in a previous episode, maybe like a month or two ago, where Biden said that he was going to initially say that he wanted to make 100 million doses within his first 100 days. He was actually getting criticized because a lot of doctors said that wasn't ambitious enough. So this is great. But keep in mind that like this was nothing unexpected because he set such low expectations. But still good. I'm very happy about this. The fact that I think right now it's almost 1 in 4 American adults are fully vaccinated, which is great. So I'm excited. What did you think about his July 4th statements?
I think that is what the administration should be focusing on for
The 4th of
messaging.
July?
Well, for telling people, because everybody just wants to hear, when are we going to get back to normal? When are we going to get back to normal? And I think it's a good idea to set those expectations and say, okay, so by July 4th, small gatherings of vaccinated people without masks should be a reality. And then I heard a video that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did where she was saying that hopefully by Christmas we can talk about kind of being back to normal, large gatherings, doing activities together, as groups, things like that. And I think that's what they should focus on and tell people this is why you don't burn your masks. This is why you should get vaccinated, is so that we can meet those goals.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
On to our main topic.
And this episode should be really called Elections Have Consequences.
I
Because
think
it's
we've
true.
called many episodes that.
Well, and that's why I can't do it anymore because I've used it so many times. But it's true. Elections do have consequences. And one of the consequences of electing Biden and getting a 50-50 Senate split with Kamala Harris as the tie-breaking vote means we get the American Rescue Plan.
Definitely better than any piece of legislation in the Trump administration for sure, and possibly up to the Affordable Care Act in the Obama administration. So one of the most important pieces of legislation
Well, and one of the biggest, too.
that's come through. I mean, Trump had just as big a piece of legislation, but it was all giving money to corporations.
Right.
So it is a very good bill, and I know a lot of people spent a lot of time focused on what's not in the bill, and I can understand that
And we'll talk about it a little.
a little bit, but it is a very good piece of legislation. It very much is focused on giving money to individuals, up to the point where I've seen it. I mean, again, we'll talk about it, but it's been like demonized by Fox News. I've heard the term monopoly money
Yeah.
thrown out, like, oh, this is just giving money to the people. Yes,
That's the point.
that's the idea. It's the exact same size as the tax cuts that Trump put through early on in his administration, which gave money to corporations, which they used to buy back stock and increase their shareholder dividends. And almost nothing went to the workers at those companies. So this is the exact opposite. It's not giving money to corporations. It's not giving money to the banks. It's giving actual help to people who desperately need it right now. So let's talk about it.
All right, let's do it. So first things first is that this was actually passed through the budget reconciliation process, which we talked about a little bit on earlier episodes. The reason why they did that was because they wanted to avoid the Senate filibuster. Also something we talked about in a previous episode. Go see our filibuster episode if you haven't already.
I feel like you said a Philip Buster there. I'm all for it.
All right, sounds good. So it did pass the Senate with a 50-49 vote, which means even the moderate Dems, like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, voted for it, which is fantastic. Now, granted, this was after the gutting of the $15 minimum wage portion of the bill, but that made it much more acceptable for these more moderate Dems to vote on it.
Who we should vote out of office.
I mean, yeah, that too. After that, it did go back to the House to get voted on again without the $15 minimum wage, and that passed with a 220 to 211 vote. So let's keep in mind here, not a single Republican voted for this bill.
Wildly
single
popular legislation that not one Republican politician supported.
Well, let's talk about how popular this thing is. I have the data. So a recent Political Morning Consult poll found that 75% of registered voters either strongly or somewhat supported the entire stimulus package. And that same Morning Consult poll also found that 59% of Republicans at least somewhat supported the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, and a Pew Research poll found 41% completely supported the bill.
And 0% of their elected officials voted for it.
So this is a popular piece of legislation. which we'll talk about why. But just note that when we talk about governments working for people, you literally have one party who is working for the people and the other party is straight up not. And it's not the fact that, oh, both sides are bad. Yes, you'll have some progressives say like, well, Democrats are just as bad as Republicans. No, literally one party voted for a very progressive piece of legislation and the entirety of the Republican Party voted no.
Democrats voted for the Republican COVID relief bills. No Republicans voted for the Democrat COVID relief bill.
So now let's take that and let's imagine what would have happened if, worst case scenario, Trump won. I don't know if we would have even gotten one of these. I know they talked about the idea of doing a $600 billion stimulus bill, but a lot of that was just for the Senate runoff elections. So I actually don't even know if we would have any type of COVID relief at all if Trump won the election.
I think there would have been stimulus checks because Trump seemed to be in favor of that because he knows in order to keep his populist appeal, that's what he needs to do.
Sure, I can see that.
But it would have been much more like what we got before, where money was going to banks to hand out to corporations and not...
And big slush funds and...
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't even use most of it, which like Republicans use that as, oh, see, you don't need more money. We didn't even use the stuff that we had in our crappy bill. Okay, thanks for letting us all know that you're completely useless and can't write useful legislation. Meanwhile, people are getting evicted from their houses. And you're saying that, we didn't even use half of the money we set aside in our bill. Yeah, because you wrote it very poorly. Thank you. Now leave.
Well, because I'm sure if it was up to Republicans, they probably would be supporting the freaking barrel fires for these stupid mask burning ceremonies.
They would have given support for landlords so that they could renovate after
they kick
kicking
out,
their tenants who couldn't pay their rent.
So then, I know we're not really in the hypothetical predictive business, Jason, but what do you think would have happened if Biden won, but we didn't win the Senate seats in Georgia?
Well, we saw this would not have passed without completely gutting all of the positive. Like we'll talk about exactly what's in this, but definitely the child tax credit. There's no way that would have gone in there.
The checks would have gone down significantly.
Yeah, and they would have been much more means tested than they were because it's what you hear right now from Republicans. They hate this and they say this was wrong and it's not targeted enough. That word, I don't know what they think it means when they have provisions that do means test in here.
And keep in mind, when they say it's not targeted enough, please remember that they had basically no targeting at all and left it all up to just various justification of Steve Mnuchin when they had their bills. And that's where you had all the big slush fund stuff and the corporations getting these PPP loans and things like that were coming up. So keep in mind, when they talk about how this bill isn't targeted enough, it's bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. Let's go through it.
Let's. So, the main components of the bill, obviously, unlike the Senate, we don't have Ron Johnson making us read all 11 hours of this bill.
Well, let's start with the most important part, at least in my opinion.
The $1,400 stimulus payments for all adults, including adult dependents. That is a change from earlier stimulus bills where adult dependents were not included. So this includes a lot of college-age kids that are still being claimed by their parents. Disabled adults who are still dependents of their parents. So it does basically give more money to more people than either of the two previous stimulus packages. There is means testing starting at $75,000 for individuals or $150,000 for married couples. And I believe it sharply decreases from $1,400. Which is unfortunate because $75,000 is not that much this day and age. I don't know who's coming up with the numbers, probably Joe Manchin, which we give so much power to the most conservative Democrats, but that's where we're at.
But we should note, though, that it is not a straight cutoff at $75,000. It is at least somewhat of a tail off.
And I think it fully cuts off at $80,000, so it's pretty steep.
Yes.
One of the other big pieces is that it gives tax relief from unemployment income for the first $10,200. So if you were unemployed...
And you're taking a part of that unemployment income.
For most of 2020, which millions of people were, you do not have to pay income tax on the first $10,200.
So just for clarification, the whole idea of unemployment is that if you happen to lose your job, you have to go on unemployment for a couple months or for whatever the reason is, and you start receiving those unemployment checks, the idea is that you have to mark those down as actual income, which would then be taxable at the end of the year. This is fantastic. Now saying that you can have up to over $10,000 just completely non-taxable. That's so great for a lot of these people.
And if you've already filed your income taxes, you should definitely go back and modify them and try to get some of that money back that you paid. And to be clear, income tax on unemployment benefits is not the way the system was designed initially. That's an 80s Rega era concept that was tacked on by Republicans and conservatives, because they always think everybody's trying to game the system and they need to just kick them even more when they're down just to make sure that they want to get back up again.
Now, this one I am so excited about. And unfortunately, a lot of Republicans are really upset about it because they're monsters. Included in this package is a child tax credit for up to $3,600 per child paid out throughout the year. The whole point of this is to try to cut childhood poverty by 40%.
I've heard as much as 50%,
which is
from the president.
Would be amazing.
Yeah, I think the more rational numbers on this is 40%.
Now, granted, this also isn't cheap. When you're estimating to around $110 billion total with this whole tax credit, this is one of the most expensive parts of this package. Now, this goes through children who are, obviously 0 to 18 years old. And
even if you're expecting.
Right, exactly. And what's cool about this is that they'll actually pay you monthly until next year's taxes are due, where they'll give you the rest of the amount in a, solid check. So say, for example, you apply for this program or apply for this tax credit, they'll actually pay you up front, like $300 a month up until next year of 2022. And then you'll receive the rest of that money during tax season.
So the directive is to try to get it monthly. The IRS is not really set up for that. So we'll have to kind of see how that shakes out. It might end up being quarterly, every other month, something like that. But the initial directive and the goal is to try to get these payments monthly. So up to $300 per child per month.
But how great would that be if they actually got it down to monthly?
It would be
fantastic.
Nice. I know it's the whole thing is like it juggles between departments and the Social Security office is really good at getting monthly payments out, but they don't really have information about what your household is like, how many kids you have, how, they keep more detailed information on older Americans, whereas the IRS has all of that child and up-to-date information, but they're not really set up for monthly payments. So it's going to take some give and take to try to get this working properly. And
personally, I really like the idea that they extended it all the way up to 18 years old and included 18-year-olds as well. Mm-hmm. Where, there are tons of 18-year-olds who are either not working or trying just to go to school and are completely dependent on their parents. So I think the fact that including 18-year-olds will help a ton for a lot of people with older parents or with older children as well.
I think these days you could go all the way up to 30.
How old am I?
Yeah, you'd still be.
I would qualify in that. Well, awesome. What else we got, Jason?
$7.5 billion in
you gotta say
CDC
core, though.
funding.
$7.5 billion.
$7.5 billion.
Put the pinky to your mouth.
In CDC funding for vaccine distribution, which this is something that you'll see Republicans complain about, is that, too much of this bill is not for COVID funding. Yeah, it's for actually helping people out who've been impacted by COVID, but...
that's a point of a relief bill.
But this is some direct funding for getting people vaccinated, which is needed. Hopefully some of this goes to education, because that apparently needs to happen in Idaho.
Now, and I'm personally torn on this next one, Jason, but overall I do think it's a good thing. The COBRA insurance premium coverage, where...
This is for people who are on COBRA.
Yep.
Which is what you're eligible for after you lose your job. You can go on COBRA. Most people do not, because it is insanely expensive.
So, and as someone who's been on COBRA before, I know how bad it sucks.
So you're paying the entire insurance premium. You pay the part that you're generally responsible for from your employer, plus the part that they are paying.
Yep.
So the costs are prohibitive. So most people don't go on it. But for people that are on it, with this program, 100% of that premium can be covered.
Which is, in the long run, that's fantastic. I really would have wished we did something else other than going through Cobra for health insurance, but fine, I'll take it.
There are also a lot of grants targeted towards hospitality-related businesses, so bars, restaurants, hotels, nightclubs, basically mostly small businesses that have taken the brunt of the COVID shutdowns, which is desperately needed, and that is $25 billion.
When we're talking about these restaurants in relief for emergency aids, we're specifically talking about these mom and pop shops who are probably getting hit hard the most. I mean, I'm sure McDonald's isn't doing so bad. I'm guessing, right?
They're really a real estate company that dabbles in food.
So the good thing about this is that it actually does limit the amount of restaurants a company can own before they get these types of aid. So in order to qualify for this aid, you have to have less than 20 restaurants or whose franchisees for this. So that means you're not going to have like your typical Outback Steakhouses, TGI Fridays, and any other crappy chain restaurant that you can think of. They're going to apply for these loans. I think I remember, what was it, Domino's and several other big chains, I think it was, that were like sucking up all this like small relief aid.
Well, because they let the banks decide who to give it to. And of course, they're going to give it to all their big customers, which are all the big corporations.
So when we're, again, talking about how Republicans are saying this isn't targeted, this is directly targeted towards people who own small businesses and small restaurants and bars. They are your neighbors, they're your community members. It cannot get more targeted than this. And if you are a restaurant owner, seriously, reach out and apply for this type of aid, because what it will do is actually it'll take your deficit and your losses from 2020 and reimburse you up to, I think it's $10 million per individual, and I think $5 million per location, which is fantastic. So you're basically getting an entire bailout for the 2020 year. So seriously, restaurants should be doing this because this is absolutely fantastic. We've bailed out big banks before. We should bail out the people, which is literally what this bill is.
And you don't even have to donate millions of dollars to anybody's campaign.
Right, exactly. Just vote for the right freaking person. So let's talk about schools.
There is $128.6 billion, which is, again, one of the larger sections of this bill, for kindergarten through 12th grade schools to reopen. We need schools to reopen. We need schools to reopen. That's the conservative war cry.
Well, let's do it, but let's do it correctly.
Let's actually give them money so they can do it safely, so they can get some of the staff that they need hired, extra staff to clean everything every day.
Yep.
They need money for ventilation system upgrades so that we're not just recycling the air in the classroom all day long, making sure that everybody gets infected. There is a lot of money that's going to be needed, a lot of the extra precautions that are going to have to be taken. We already know, right, that teachers have to pay for their school supplies out of their own pocket most of the time. Who's going to pay for all these extra things that are needed to keep everybody safe? Well, hopefully this bill will provide the funding necessary for that.
And let's keep talking about that whole targeting thing that Republicans love to tell us. I guess that's going to be my main tie-in for every single point.
That's
here.
their big complaint.
So let's talk about this. These are specifically meant for public schools. In fact, they even have a clause in the package limiting, I think, around 2% of all of these funding to go to private schools. And the only reason why those schools are even getting funding is because those are especially exempt schools who are in predominantly disadvantaged communities. So again, great targeting. This is exactly what we need.
Too many federal programs take money away from public schools, like charter schools and voucher programs. So it's good to see the federal government giving money primarily to public schools.
Well, and it gets better. So about $7.2 billion were actually allocated for the FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, to ensure that all students have internet access during remote learning. And the idea is, while we all are in this new world of virtual learning and Zoom calls and meetings and email, we forget to realize that a lot of our country still does not have good broadband internet yet. So this is going to help with that actual broadband expansion, so that people in rural communities and native lands can actually get the internet and education they deserve.
It really should be a public utility at this point.
You would think so. Do I know what side's arguing against it? I'll tell you. I'll tell you all day.
We also have extension of the $300 unemployment assistance through September. Unfortunately, I think that ends on Labor Day. That's fun. That your unemployment will run out on the day that you're supposed to be celebrating
That's
workers.
such a Biden thing to do.
And that was something that I believe they had to fight with Joe Manchin over.
Did not have it end on Labor Day?
No, to extend it.
Oh.
That was one of the big, we'll get to when we talk about what's not in the bill, but this was a big sticking point for the conservative Democrats. It was set to expire on Sunday as well, March 14th.
Yeah.
We also, a big important piece, rent and mortgage payment assistance. $19 billion in emergency rental assistance, $100 million to housing counseling programs, $5 billion to combat homelessness. There is also a mortgage payment program in here as well. So hopefully we can keep as many people as possible in their homes after a year plus of a global pandemic. This is something that has not happened in any of our lifetimes, not since the Spanish flu of 1918.
Well, we need to think about this as well. I mean, I'm sure we've made these arguments before, but when you talk about very progressive policies like this that are obviously very expensive, we need to understand that these are also meant to prevent a snowball effect, right? Everyone always talks about how expensive it is to be poor. And when you have situations like this where people are losing their jobs and not able to work, you see a very rapid snowballing effect where you start having people losing their jobs, ending up on the street, and actually causing communities much worse outcomes, including financial outcomes, because they're spending so much money on police and hospital services on these people. This is a good thing to prevent that from happening. We want people to stay in their homes, obviously, and that's not just from an ethical standpoint or a moral standpoint. This is a good financial decision as well that will help us in the long run.
And also good morally and ethically.
I mean, yeah, I'm trying to appeal to the people who aren't moral and ethical. I mean, but
not our listeners.
I say, but if you're watching our show, you're not moral and ethical, man. Like, what are you doing? You're listening to the wrong show. Or what are we doing wrong?
This also includes some money for worker pension funding. There were a lot of pensions that were in risk of becoming insolvent because of this crisis. So very important, if you have a job that still pays you a pension, which those are becoming fewer and harder to find these days, but it's important for the federal government to protect that. That is people's retirement. That goes, again, to what we were saying about the mortgage payment and rental assistance. Anything you can do to keep people out of poverty and out of relying on other government programs is going to save money in the long run.
Yep.
And this is a big one. Pensions can be, the difference between ending up on food assistance when you retire and being able to handle everything yourself. So.
And speaking of food assistance.
And speaking of food, see, look at that. Who says Joe's terrible at transitions other than me?
Everyone else.
There's a 15% expansion to the SNAP program through September, which again, this is what we need. We need to give people as much assistance as possible in every aspect of their life to help them get through this. And that's what this bill does beautifully. It's not just checks, because that makes headlines. It's every aspect of federal assistance that they can possibly expand, increase, help out with, because, and I know I don't really see the difference during this COVID. I did have at one point a reduction of my hours, but I get paid well enough where it's not really that big of a deal. We didn't really have to change much of what we did, because I was able to work from home, just the decrease in gas and expenses related to travel made up the difference there. So I've been very fortunate through this where it really hasn't touched me.
Well, I'm thinking about all the hospitality workers and things like that.
People that have just straight lost their jobs, that are reliant on all these government programs, and your kids are home all the time. So your expense for food has gone up.
Yep.
Because now you don't have, one meal a day taken care of. Now you're having to pay for everything. It makes sense to increase SNAP benefits because everyone's expenses have gone up as well. And again, that comes through putting yourself in somebody else's shoes for once and not just think, because if I just think of myself, I would go, what's the deal with all this extra money? The point is to not just think of yourself and to think of other people and why they might actually need this assistance.
And this one I kind of was not suspecting about. I was very happy about this. Reimbursement for COVID-related death and funeral expenses.
This is something they did have through 2020. So this is another extension of those benefits.
And great. I'm super happy.
Yeah, imagine you're already struggling, and not only do you have a death in your family, which is heartbreaking enough.
But you can't afford the funeral.
Right. But now, you had to pay for the funeral, your family had to pay for the funeral, and you're talking thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah, because the funeral industry is a ripoff.
Of unnecessary expenses. Shout out to all our undertakers out there. And now you had to shoulder that benefit, plus you're out of work or have reduced hours. It's a compounding problem. And this is, again, just another aspect for the government to reach out and help you with, assist you with. You didn't cause the pandemic. It's not your fault that over 500,000 Americans have lost their lives because of COVID. It's the right thing for everyone to get together. And we'll not just say for the government to do. No, this is all Americans chipping in.
Jason, I remember the wise words from a very, very wise Texas mayor. Something about how local government shouldn't help you and sink or swim, mofos.
So other than that, and again, and that's the thing too, with that guy, he's thinking the government is like some kind of thing. No, it's not the government. This is what we all decide to do as a community and as a country. And as a country, we decided to get together to use $2 trillion where the federal money, the money doesn't belong to anyone in particular, it belongs to all of us. We get together and decide to use that money to help everyone get through this crisis. And this is detailing every single small little way that we can do that.
Well, and again, this is not Reagan's the government is the enemy thing, right? Even though I am a part of the government crap. This is literally the government working for the people. This is what you want a government to do. This is why you have a government, is to probably reallocate funds to help the community at large.
It's the right thing to do. And it's what government is for and should be for.
And like I talked about before, there was actual extensions in the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP loans, and that equated to $7.25 billion, which actually in retrospect is not that much compared to other parts of this package. But there's a good reason for that, right? The reason why is because this is, again, much more highly targeted. So you're not going to see all those same issues that you saw before with, I know we had lots of issues with churches, especially the Catholic diocese, taking lots of PPP loan programs. I think there was even issues with
the child rape organization?
Yeah, that one. That particular one, I think there were even issues with, it was like Joel Osteen's church got like a ton of, I think it's like $500 million or something like that. So they're not going to have any of that this time. There are no publicly traded corporations that are eligible for these loans, and they specifically make it for very small and small businesses, which is fantastic. Again, your mom and pop shops that Republicans keep talking about, but won't do anything to help.
Because they're not the big donors.
Exactly. It also increased subsidies for Americans buying health care through the Affordable Care Act.
So if you do get your health care through a government portal, hopefully your premiums will be going down. And this increases the incentive for the 12 states, including Wisconsin, that do not subscribe to the public option. It won't do anything because right before Tony Evers was elected governor, well, actually right after he was elected governor, right before he went into office, the state legislature changed the rules so that he wasn't able to enroll the state in the healthcare plan. Let that sink in for a second. But hopefully it will give more ammunition for those like us wishing to change that situation in their state.
And let's keep the topic on state and local. And this is the last point we have on here. There's some more stuff in the bill as well that we can talk about in a little bit. But for the main thing that we're really getting stuff out of, you also have $350 billion allocated to aid for state and local governments. And what does this mean? This basically means that your Republican governors in like your crazy red states like Alabama and Texas, like freaking Greg Abbott over there, are going to look like heroes because they now have the actual resources they need to combat this virus. And they're going to still demonize Joe Biden at the end of the day, but fine. That means these governments actually can do things, continue like vaccine programs, continue actual like counseling programs like we talked about before, and then just overall maintenance of the city throughout all this craziness that's been happening.
Public transportation has taken big hits.
That's a big one. Yeah.
So hopefully they'll get funding for that.
So this is really good. And again, something Trump would have never done.
Constantly railed against. Bailing out Democrat cities, even though it's everywhere.
And this is literally bailing out like Republican governments now.
Because we're not
evil.
Yeah, we don't care if the money goes to help everyone.
Even though they do take the money and still complain about it afterwards. Ungrateful bastards.
So what's not in the bill?
Well, we kind of already talked about before. The $15 minimum wage was the big thing that was voted against in the Senate.
So what we had there was the Senate parliamentarian decided that the $15 minimum wage could not be part of reconciliation. And Bernie Sanders actually forced a vote on the issue of overriding the parliamentarian, and 8 Democrats, including 1 independent, voted against overriding the parliamentarian to add $15 minimum wage as an item in this bill. And that includes, in case you happen to be in any of these states, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, John Tester of Montana, Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire,
wow,
Kristen Sinema of Arizona, Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, 2 senators from Delaware, Chris Coons and Tom Carper, which supposedly they're both friends of Joe Biden,
yeah,
so that's interesting.
I'm not shocked with that, though.
And independent Angus King of Maine, who caucuses with the Senate Democrats. So make sure to call them and let them know that you're not happy with that decision, and vote for someone else the next time they're up for election.
And one thing I do want to address as well is there's a lot of talk from progressives saying, well, Joe Biden could have just fired the parliamentarian. Why didn't he just fire the parliamentarian? Well, and I think it was even like Cenk Uygur saying like, well, because he didn't fire the parliamentarian shows that he never really cared about $15 minimum wage to begin with. And that's just idiotic. So screw that. The idea that firing your parliamentarian would have been a good thing is one of the worst takes possible right now, especially when we have a laundry list of things that we got because of this COVID package. So doing this just to force $15 minimum wage would have risked everything on this package from even passing to begin with. Now, some people may say, well, Republicans fired the parliamentarian back in 2000, which is a very nonsense argument because the whole idea of them doing that was because they actually found their parliamentarian to be completely inconsistent in their rulings and actually hired a Democrat parliamentarian for their procedural processes afterwards. So no, even in the one instance where Republicans did fire the parliamentarian, they hired a Democrat and not a rubber stamp to do what they wanted. So to actually fire the parliamentarian just to be a rubber stamp for what Joe Biden wanted, even if it is for a good cause, that would have led to complete and total outrage from a good chunk of the country. And we don't want that. So we'll still fight for it. It's just not in this bill. And let's be honest here too. Again, it all goes back to why the filibuster is garbage and we need to get rid of it. I don't like the fact that we're pushing all this crap in budget reconciliation. We have to, because that's how politics right now works. And I'm glad we're doing it. We're playing hard politics. Democrats finally have a spine to talk about. But in like a perfect world, I would love for this stuff to actually be passed through real means as opposed to just finding a loophole to get this passed by majority vote.
I'd like to start pushing for a $22 minimum wage so that 15 is seen as a compromise. Because I've already heard like, well, we should do $11. And that is still below poverty level for a minimum wage. $15 is like the lowest acceptable.
Yeah.
Like where you're still not doing well. You don't have any money for anything other than food and shelter, but at least you can pay for food and shelter.
And the fact that some Republicans are now starting to even go up and offer higher minimum wages like Tom Cotton shows that we're winning the argument.
It is popular.
Yeah, so don't cave to what they want. Go all the way. Screw them. We saw what we can do. We don't need their freaking approval for stuff. We can do this type of stuff without their approval. Let's just do it.
And regardless, even if it does pass, we need to move on to the next total, because $15 was proposed like 10 years ago.
Yep.
So we should already be talking about $20 plus $22, $24 minimum wage, because that would actually be in keeping with inflation. And just start making it seem like $15 is the compromise instead of $11 being the compromise. When $11 isn't a compromise, that's a death sentence to anyone trying to live off of that wage. You work 40 hours a week, minimum wage should not be a death sentence. And it is currently.
So what else was taken off this package?
So the other big piece of contention that was removed from the bill that initially passed the House was the amount of unemployment increase from the federal program. So it was a $400 increase, which got lowered to $300. And then that's when they were also able to tack on the couple extra weeks, which ironically extended it until Labor Day.
And you said a lot of this was probably Joe Manchin's fault?
Yes, Joe Manchin did not want the $400. So he was the big stumbling block. Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema are basically going to be able to impose a lot of power with the fact that we're at a 50-50 split. Just remember that in the midterm elections, that we want to get more than 50 Democrats in the Senate so that we don't have to rely on people like Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin.
I agree.
Ron Johnson is up for re-election in 2022.
Let's get him.
He may not run, but who cares? Vote for the Democrat.
Yeah, just vote for the Democrat. And tell everyone you know to vote for the Democrat.
And also spit on Ron Johnson if you see him.
And then tell people you don't know to vote for the Democrat.
And spit on Ron Johnson.
And then spit on Ron Johnson. But in that order.
But not John Ronson, who is actually a very good author.
Oh, yeah.
Men Who Stare at Goats.
Yep.
Yeah.
Psychopath. Don't spit on him.
He's a good guy. Congratulate him. Spit on Ron Johnson.
All right. So like we said before, this package came with its heavy dose of Republican criticism. So I want to go through a couple of those things. And this is why we left out a couple of details, because I want to show you what Fox News has been framing these things as. So let's start with this. A quote from Fox News. Here's a closer look at some components you may be surprised to discover were included in this relief bill. And,
dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. And they talked consistently several times about how things were tucked away in this package that you were never expecting. Here we go. Biden's coronavirus relief bill includes $60 billion in surprise tax hikes. That's from Fox News. So what does it do? Basically, and I had to check, this is definitely in there. The bill limits deductions and tax credits for publicly traded companies who pay their top employees over $1 million per year.
Great.
Da, da, da. Because again, it's targeted towards the small working class people.
Those companies have been paying way too little in taxes. How many times has it come up where you look at companies like Amazon and GE and they've paid nothing in taxes because they have teams of lawyers and accountants whose jobs are to figure out any way and anything they can do in order to not pay any taxes.
Well, on top of that, when we're seeing one of the worst economies in our nation's history, top corporations were seeing record profits. And at the very least, business as usual.
This was a gigantic windfall for Amazon. Everyone's staying at home and ordering everything online. It could not have been better for them.
So what else does Fox News hate?
Roughly $500 million will go toward doubling the budgets of the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the National Endowment of the Arts and Humanities.
Wow. How do you feel about that? Are you angry?
I'm so angry.
You hate your government, Jason?
That it's going to the National Endowment of the Arts and Humanities.
And it's going to museums?
You liberals and your books and statues and paintings.
Now, actually, I do want to get your opinion on this. I do have an answer, but I want to see what your answer is first. So the idea is this is actually doubling their typical standard annual budget, where their usual budget's around $200 to $250 million per year, and they're getting an extra $500 million. So how do you feel about the fact that they doubled the budget for these things in a supposed COVID relief plan?
So these are things that are the responsibility of the federal government anyway.
I think that's step one, right?
And they do have increased expenses in the COVID world Because again, they need to do things in order to keep everyone safe and still be open because, again, this is a federal service. It is important for education. You want to take a field trip to a museum? You don't want
A crappy museum.
right. You don't want things constantly closed or, wings shut off because they can't afford to pay electricity for that much of the building or heat it or cool it or whatever. So yeah, this all makes sense. And again, operating expenses are going to be a lot higher as we're digging out of COVID. So they've been well overdue for an increase in their budget anyway, because all Republicans ever do is cut spending for the arts in the first place because they don't understand any of it and want to get rid of it. It's not football. They don't care about it. And that comes from someone who loves football way more than they do art museums. But I still understand the benefit of the art museums and know that football's kind of dumb.
Yeah, I love that answer. That's exactly what I would say. In the exact words, the way you said it.
Well, you wrote that script. So.
Oh, okay, good. Don't sell yourself short. That was off the dome here. There's no, your answer was written down.
I am not a robot.
I am. Let's see what else Fox News hates. An extra $5 billion was also allocated for disadvantaged farmers. This was introduced by Senator Raphael Warnock, guy who just won the Georgia Senate runoff. The $5 billion Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act, which is part of the stimulus bill, will provide direct payments to Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous farmers.
I think I found the part that Republicans don't like about this.
Bah, bah, bah. It also includes an extra $1 billion to address systemic racism at the U.S. Agriculture Department and provide legal assistance to farmers of color, which is fantastic because when you think of typical farmers, you think of like that rural working class white guy, right? Without realizing there's plenty of farmers of color who are not getting this assistance they need. So I'm really happy about this.
Farming, very important. It's a very hard way to make a living.
And I'm really glad to hear the Republicans hate rural Americans. I'm really happy that they finally set their foot down and said this was a bad thing.
And this is more of the targeting because most of the farming that you see these days is large corporate farms. And the, small family farm is kind of a thing of the past.
Especially in Wisconsin.
Yeah. We were an economy built on small family farms that are almost completely gone these days.
Yep. And like we talked about before, there's a definite ACA expansion, which, they hate the ACA. So, of course, they're going to hate it.
AKA Obamacare.
Oh, my God, man. I'm so sick of that Obama, By the way, that whole stupid nickname, I'm surprised that even catches on at all. That people think that that's a clever nickname for Obama.
Most of those are pretty terrible and not very clever.
The names or the Republicans?
Either.
I have a quote from Republican Senator Pat Toomey, who said, "This is not a COVID bill. This is not a rescue plan." Yes, it is. "This is the last train leaving the station that the Democrats can plausibly pretend is about COVID or the economic recovery. And so they're loading it up with long-standing liberal wish lists of items that have nothing to do with restoring economic growth or combating the pandemic."
Both incorrect as a statement and basically as an idea. Oh, this isn't about COVID. They're just helping working class Americans in general.
Yep. Although I will say, this is definitely a liberal wish list. I'm very happy with this.
Again, like we talked about, probably the best piece of legislation since the Affordable Care Act.
So that's the American Rescue Plan. I'm pretty damn happy. I'm sure you are too, Jason, and hopefully you listeners are as well.
I've already contributed some of that stimulus money to the economy.
By buying Bernie beer.
We did buy some Progressive beer. I bought a new chair. I do work from home, so I've worn down my previous computer chair. And I'm going to do some upgrades to my computer that I've been putting off. My computer's about 4 years old. And these are things that I was literally waiting for this round of checks in order to purchase. So that's the idea, right? Is that even people like me, who I talked about, weren't really impacted by the pandemic. I didn't really lose anything. But by me getting this $1,400 check, I will spend it. I will put it into the economy. Unlike somebody who's making $1 million a year, that just throws it at their stock portfolio and it doesn't actually go to anyone. And that is how this will help boost the economy. And the idea, again, is once we're all able, we get vaccinated, we're all able to go out to dinner again, we'll have some extra money in our pockets to spend and prop up all those small businesses that have been having such a hard time. So eat it, Pat Toomey.
Just compare this to what the Republicans were proposing just, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, whenever things were happening?
Before the election?
Well, with the Senate runoffs. They only had a $600 billion plan. Remember, this is a $1.9 trillion plan, and look at all the things we're getting because of it. So when you think about what they were going to do with that $600 billion, they were going to drastically cut the direct payments from $1,400 to $1,000 for people, and actually make it so the threshold to get those is much lower, which is only $40,000 as opposed to $75,000, which I find absolutely ridiculous because that would cut out so many Americans here.
Including me.
Right. And then if you want extra money because of dependents, like children, if you care about that amazing tax credit, they're going to give you an extra $500. Sweet. But even look at unemployment, where they were going to do this is the same $300 per week, but they were only going to have it through June as opposed to now they have it through September. So these are really good things that you helped make, because not only did you guys help elect Joe Biden as the president, but you helped the Democrats get a majority in the Senate. This is what happens when you have good people who know what they're doing in power, who actually care about the country and the sustainability over a long period of time and not for the next freaking month, and who care about Dr. Seuss and what gender a potato is.
And how sexy
a rabbit is. Ugh.
How many conservatives are furries, do you think? Seems like a lot. Like way more than you would expect.
Do you think, what do you think the political demographics are of furries?
It seems like they're, you look at the edgelords on Twitter, they all have the anime avatars.
Yeah.
And the furries on there. So I think they
skew Republican?
Yeah, they seem to skew conservative.
If anyone has the demographic data on furries, let me know. I'd love to find out.
They are the ones most affected by this Space Jam decision.
Who will also be getting these $1,400 checks thanks to Joe Biden and the Democrats.
They can buy Lola Rabbit Space Jam.
They can buy all
pillows.
the copies of Space Jam until they ruined every single one. And that's what we're going to end it on. Have a good night.
Have fun, you maniacs.
You Taz maniacs and devils. All right, now I'm done. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively. Hello, this is I almost forgot what it was. And in recent developments of the Derek Chauvin trial, in recent developments I saw your head shaking, and you're like, nah.
How many takes?
No, I'm trying to not do that. Don't. I heard the outtakes. It hurts.